Arab unity, Arab nationalism, Arab fraternity, Arab consciousness. What is this, Arab that all about? Arabs generally identify with this notion of a oneness, a togetherness with their fellow Arab brothers and sisters. Why is that? Why do Arabs feel that there exists something tangible and valuable in their collective belonging? For sure, it's not because there's a dominant single ethnicity amongst all Arabs. This is reflected in the diversity shown from the shores of the Gulf across to the Atlantic, south of the Anatolian Peninsula, all the way down to the Horn of Africa. This geographic range exhibits great diversity in ethnic origins. So where does this belief come from? And how prevalent and relevant is it in today's day and age? Does it even compute into the newer generation psyches? That's what we'll be discussing in today's video. What makes Arabs alike and what separates them? And how throughout history this element of unity has waxed and waned dependent on past circumstances. The oneness of Arabs throughout antiquity was never a conscious aspiration or mission. Only with the birth of Islam did Muslims, strictly Arabs at the time, unite under the banner of a faith, and thereafter these Arabs would establish an empire that would span most of the civilized world. But quickly, this empire would change from being one involving strictly Arab leadership and population to then include vastly varying ethnicities: Persians, Anatolian, Asian, Amazigh, and even, eventually, European peoples. This great Arab empire couldn't be labeled as only Arab anymore, but more accurately as Muslim. And by the 16th century, the notion of being Arab disappeared completely, as it was then replaced with the Ottoman Empire. With the 19th century came Europe's age of enlightenment to the Arab world, and firstly in Egypt, and with it came new ideas and concepts of nationalism and identity. Wave after wave, iterations of Arab national consciousness and autonomy came into effect. Hamad Ali Pasha, although an Albanian, had exploits in the mid-19th century to unify Egypt, Sudan, Hijaz, and Syria, and these were the first inklings into the establishment of a unified Arab power. Hussein al-Hashimi, the Sharif and Emir of Mecca in the early 20th century, negotiated with the British and the French a revolt against the Ottomans during World War I in return for a promise of a unified Arab nation, including Greater Syria, Transjordan, Iraq, and the Hijaz. The first instant of pan-Arab nationalism that was then to be shunned by the victorious colonial powers. The idea of Arab unification arrived at its peak in the second third of the 20th century, with Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian president, who appealed to the greater Arab world in promoting pan-Arab nationalism, even to the extent of creating new modern republics that merged two or more recently independent Arab countries. These preceding aspirations and attempts were all led by key charismatic leaders who had certain visions that didn't necessarily match the conditions or dynamics of the geopolitical world at the time, and the last of which, with Abdel Nasser, that would see the collapse of any notion of Arab unity with the 1967 Six-Day War's humiliating defeat by Israel. The question that presents itself: why do Arabs still subscribe to this concept of a oneness? A collective consciousness that has one desperate time after another failed horribly. Yet even now, after more than 50 years of the collapse of the promise of Arab unity, there still seems to be hope and possibility amongst Arabs of its resurrection. It's quite perplexing to answer the question of why Arabs have believed and still believe in this oneness. The factors that unify them are curiously the same factors that push them apart. The commonality of language is a main attribute of what makes an Arab believe that he or she are part of a larger group. But at the same time, Arabs, generally outside of Fusha, that's classical Arab used strictly for official correspondence, literature, and parts of the media, have varying difficulty comprehending each other's colloquial expression. Arabic dialects have a regionality that can be broken up into 5 main subgroups: that of northwestern African Arab countries, Egypt and the African Horn, the Levant, the Gulf, and southern Arabia. These regions have difficulty in comprehending each other's dialects. The further away from each other geographically leads to a higher degree of difficulty in understanding. Religion, another historically unifying factor, since most Arabs shared a common religion with each other since the rise of Islam, also impacts Arab disunity. When looking at the main pillars of the faith, all Muslims are united on those foundations. The subdivisions come with the particulars of the interpretations, traditions, and most importantly, the sequence of succession of leadership that has divided Muslims and subsequently divided the Arabs. Today, the chasm between Sunni and Shia is at its greatest, with numerous Arab nations reflecting alternating majority and minorities of these two main Islamic sects formulating their populations, thereby creating great dissonance for any possible advent of unity. Another powerful unifier of Arabs is their collective memory. Memories of the golden age of Islam when Arabs ruled the world from every angle, geographically, culturally, socially, and academically. Memories of when Muslims, and hence Arabs, were a true reflection of their potential. A potential that was still there, dormant, yet ready to be reborn and unleashed for all the world to witness. Yet it's this same memory that has started dividing Arabs, when each people began prioritizing their own individual history and identity. National memory proceeded to trump the collective memory. Egyptians revert their evocation towards ancient Egypt as the highly advanced pharaonic civilization that was equal to that of the Arab Islamic Empire at its height. The coastal Levant began identifying more with the adventurous and entrepreneurial Phoenicians, northwestern African nations as prideful non-Arab Amazigh tribes that were suppressed by the Arabs, and Iraqis as the mighty Babylonians who were one of the oldest civilizations on earth. All moments in individual histories when the respective ancestries held power and prosperity. And with this new recollection of memory, the collective Arab identity noticeably collapsed. The last major factor that both unifies and separates Arabs is also linked with memory, but deserves its own elaboration as the element of injustices that have been suffered by the Arabs. Also, we can refer to it as the victimhood. This is an extremely powerful factor that sees its impact increase to this very day. Collectively, Arabs have experienced great suffering and felt great victimhood at the hands of colonial powers since the 19th century. Oppression, broken promises, deceit, and treachery by the West fed the joint suffering for Arabs on two main fronts. The first was the unilateral creation of a foreign Jewish state in the midst of the Arab world, and second was the strategic abuse of power in securing the region's natural resources, and primarily petroleum. How victimhood still plays a growingly divisive role for Arabs is that for some Arab countries, this injustice has been dominant, while for others has yet to peak. Of the 22 Arab nations, no less than 7 suffer with conflicts and instability that have been fed by modern imperialism, thus pushing these Arab nations into a state of chaos, poverty, and misery, whereas the rest of Arabs proceed onwards on their own path towards development and prosperity. And when we look back at the last century for Arabs, the real dissonance and separation began with the influx of statehood and independence taking place in the mid-20th century. That's when the more modern differences started to emanate. Depending on who your occupier was, one nation might become a republic, whereas another next door, a monarchy. Authoritarian rule next to a constitutional monarchy. Sharia law or civil law flavored with Islamic jurisprudence. A country could one day be overwhelmingly sectarian and the next aspiring to be ruled by a code of Islamic law. Such extremity in governance systems was only further exacerbated by the economic fortunes and misfortunes that would see the creation of two Arab worlds, the haves with their immediate resource-rich status and the have-nots, whose prosperity depended on modernization and the enterprise of their own governments and populations. A clear and visible chasm splinters the Arab world into two existences: booming nations and overhauled societies, while the other half, nations that wallow in economic struggle, ineffective education, and limited opportunity. The same dissonance is reflected in many other modern nation-state building exercises that are seeing varying levels of development across Arab nations: societal reform, health and well-being improvement, fighting undernourishment, gender equality, fighting corruption, and disparity of basic guaranteed rights of residence, utilities, and digital access. Now, when you overlap all the factors of Arab unity and disunity, the language, religion, memory, governance, economic status, social reform, and human development of all the different Arab nations, a very lopsided yet convincing picture presents itself. The Arab world is more stratified than it's ever been. And with this, I recall a statement I read before, but one that never really convinced me. The Arab world is the most unequal region in the world. So how can a region so extremely unequal aspire anymore to become one and unified? There have been attempts in the past to bring together Arabs, institutions that have tried at some type of union. The League of Arab States, currently known as the Arab League, the Union of Nations such as the United Arab Republic and the Arab Federation in the 1950s, and the limited yet promising Gulf Cooperation Council. All attempts that are now drifting further towards failure than towards success. And as per public Arab opinion, these failures, more often than not, are not attributed to the Arabs themselves, but to outsiders, the West and their agendas in preserving a division amongst the Arab people. At the height of Pan-Arabism and several years before the nightmare of the Six-Day War in 1967, Mahmoud Darwish, a Palestinian poet who was entrenched in Arab nationalism, wrote a poem that begins with the proud and confident line, "Register this, I am an Arab." This reflected an honored dream of a one Arab people and a collective belief that union was imminent. Under 3 decades later, Nizar Qabbani, the most widely read Syrian poet, would reply, subsequent to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, "Are we Arabs one big lie?" A mere 30 years separated these two men's opposing perspectives. Is unity amongst Arabs a lie? Everything today points in that direction. So, is the dream finally dead? I personally think not. I believe the dream needs to evolve a little. There is hope for Arabs to come closer. Maybe not in the way and manner that Arab nationalists believed in the 20th century, but a recognition that what unites us is indeed both important and relevant. Not a unity that forsakes our own independent narratives and identities, but one that recognizes and builds upon the factors that combine us. A way where fighting with each other ceases forever, where sectarianism is replaced with compassion and understanding, when the gaps and the prevalent inequalities are exponentially reduced through constructive cooperation and benevolent support. Maybe then we can start to dream again, even if just a little.